September 15th, 1944. I stood in the Amtrak landing vehicle and watched as the beach erupted in an impressive naval bombardment. As the Amtrak lurched forwards, I felt sick to my core. This was all the training had led up to. Machine gun fire whipped overhead of us as we rocked about inside the Amtrak. "This is it, boys," yelled the sergeant, just like they do in the movies, I felt. The Amtrak hit the sand and we were given the order to climb over the side and jump down to the beach below. As I climbed over, red-hot tracers streaked past my face, and I slipped and fell in pain. I only had one thought in my mind: get off the damned beach. All around me, fellow Marines were being hit by machine gun fire or blown away by shells. It was absolute pandemonium. I felt nothing but anger, frustration, and pity. Somehow I made it to the tree line. A few of my buddies were there. They handed me a cigarette. I did not smoke, but in that moment, I would take any small comfort the world would throw at me. That night was when I experienced prolonged shell barrages for the first time. There is nothing quite like it. The noise is absolutely astounding. The chaos and destruction of the barrage will torture your body and mind. I had to suppress the urge to scream, sob, and cry. These barrages, they seemed like they would never end. The dawn came with demoralizing news. Water supplies had run out. Any water that was found had been poisoned by retreating Japanese. Combine this with the intense Pacific sun and it was a miserable morning all around. Our objective for that day was to cross over and take the airfield on Peleliu. We set off to cross the open runway, amidst relentless enemy shelling. As I ran, lugging the heavy mortar gun, my friend Snafu was hit by a piece of stray shrapnel. It knocked him off his feet and I feared the worst. I rushed to help him, and praise God Almighty when I see the metal was deflected by his pistol belt. A miracle, that's for sure. The following night, I almost shot one of my buddies. He was outside of his foxhole after dark and failed to give the password when asked. I'd heard stories of Japanese infiltrators sneaking into American camps at night and killing sleeping Marines before disappearing into the bushes without a sound. I was determined to not fall victim to such an attack. Over the next few days, I began to understand why the 1st Marine Division is referred to as the Raggedy-Ass Marines. The grime, dirt, and lack of personal hygiene that was common amongst infantrymen due to their lack of any real sanitary procedures was unheard of. We all lived in squalor. With the airfield taken, our battalion turned its attention to Blood Nose Ridge. As the infantry attacked, my mortar team supported the offensive. Throughout the attack, casualties inevitably mounted. Our mortar team was called up to bear stretchers carrying the wounded. Every man, no matter his rank or job, did duty as a rifleman and stretcher bearer throughout campaigns. Later, the attack was called off and we were forced to retreat. That night, I was awoken by screams. A Marine in a neighboring foxhole was yelling at the top of his lungs. A nightmare. The poor man's mind was finally broken. It wasn't long before other Marines began swarming around him, trying to wake him and calm him down. He fought like a wildcat, yelling and screaming at the top of his lungs. The efforts to silence him were futile. There was a dull thud as the screaming man was hit over the head with a shovel. The wound was fatal. I prayed that I would not be the next to break. Our company is relieved the next morning. The company's next objective is to take the northern part of Peleliu, Nagasaboose Island, also known as the Lobster Claw. Whilst delivering supplies, I see our company commander, Captain Andrew Akak Halliday, as he prepared for the assault on the Lobster Claw. Akak was the finest commander a Marine could ask for. Pleasant but firm, he was respected by both his men and peers alike. He had a reassuring and comforting presence and would always put the well-being of his men first. A truly great man. One night when I'm on watch, I spot 2 Japanese infiltrators in our camp. They begin running. One jumps into a foxhole along with a Marine and is swiftly dispatched, whilst the other is knocked down by the butt of a Marine's rifle. During the confusion, a Marine by the name of Bill is shot through the temple by one of his buddies. Bill told nobody he was leaving his foxhole. We all liked Bill a great deal. We received no fire during the initial landing on Nagasaboose Island. Some fellow Marines were already clearing the bunkers as we climbed out of our Amtraks. As we moved inland, it wasn't long before a buddy and I were pinned behind a rock by the relentless fire of an enemy machine gun. My buddy is hit. Ken Doc Coswell came to our aid. The Marine Corpsmen were greatly respected and appreciated by those with whom they'd served. Doc Coswell was a shining example of a true professional. Further inland, Snafu and I had set up our mortar about 5 feet from what appeared to be an undamaged enemy bunker. We'd been told it was clear. I heard something behind me in the pillbox. I grabbed my carbine and alerted the men. "Shucks, Sledgehammer, you're cracking up," replied one as he peered through the ventilator port of the pillbox. Suddenly he jumped back, firing his carbine into the port. The Japanese inside began yelling. I peered over the door of the bunker. A Japanese soldier was standing right there. He opened fire and jerked my head down. Bullets whizzing overhead, my ears rang and my heart was in my throat. I knew damn well I had to be dead. My terror subsided into a cold, homicidal rage and a vengeful desire to get even. Grenades were thrown into the pillbox. It wasn't long before a tank came to help us out. It fired into the bunker, blowing a hole through. The Japanese soldiers ran out, ready to fight. My carbine was already up. I began squeezing off shots. I hit my target in the chest and his face contorted in agony. His knees buckled and he collapsed to the ground. Even in the face of these fast-moving events, I looked down at my carbine with sober reflection. I had just killed a man at close range. The expression on that man's face filled me with shame and then disgust for the war and all the misery it was causing. My fellow Marines wasted no time in looting the bodies. It was uncivilized, as is all war, and was carried out with that particular savagery that characterized the struggle between the Marines and the Japanese. A Marine next to me was extracting the golden teeth of a fallen Japanese soldier with his knife. Such was the incredible cruelty that decent men could commit when reduced to brutish existence and their fight for survival amid the violent death, terror, tension, fatigue, and filth that was infantrymen's war. It didn't take long to capture what remained of Nagasaboose. Our casualties were remarkably low for the number of Japanese killed. During a break in a patrol, I looked around at the bodies of the fallen Japanese soldiers. Their teeth were glistening with gold. I had never tried looting golden teeth. I took out my knife and went to make the extraction. A hand grasped me by the shoulder. It was Doc Coswell. A concerned expression on his face. He dissuaded me from taking the teeth. The doc was a good friend of mine, a fine, genuine person whose sensitivity hadn't been crushed out by the war. He was merely trying to help me retain some of mine and not become completely callous and harsh. Another day passed and our convoy was hit with a rogue shell. More good men killed in an instant. There was no end in sight for this senseless violence. I sat on my helmet, put my face in my hands to try to shut out reality. I began sobbing. The harder I tried to stop, the worse it got. I was sickened and revolted to see healthy young men get hurt and killed day after day. I felt I couldn't take anymore. I was so terribly tired and so emotionally wrung out from being afraid on days on end that I seemed to have no reserve strength left. The dead were safe. We were far from it. On the 29th of September, we moved back to northern Peleliu, where we were met with our next assignment. The only part of Peleliu that we did not control were the central ridges, known as the Umurbrogl Pocket. October 3rd, 1944. Our battalion made an attack on the Five Sisters. one of the coral hill masses that made up the Umabrogel pocket. My mortar section was called up to act as stretcher bearers for the wounded riflemen. It was back-breaking and exhausting work in the sweltering heat. I marveled at the attitude of the casualties we transported. When conscious, they always remained supremely confident that we would get them out alive. When night came, these ridges were like another world. Unlike previous nights on Peleliu and Nagisabus Island, the Japanese soldiers would attack every single night. They would slip out of the caves and silently infiltrate our positions. The fanaticism and lack of self-preservation the enemy displayed during these night raids are what made it seem like we were fighting an inhuman enemy. Persistent and relentless fighting continued for days on end. We were occasionally supported by tanks, but not nearly enough. The official reason given for this was that the men were badly depleted and debilitated. I knew this was not the case. Men were expected to keep going beyond the limits of human endurance. In war, men are expendable. Machines, however, are not. It was the morning of October 12th when Captain Andrew Haldane was killed. One of our buddies came to us and broke the news. I was stunned and sickened. I turned away from the others, sat on my helmet, and sobbed quietly. Never in my wildest imaginations had I contemplated Captain Haldane's death. Somehow, I had assumed Akak was immortal. Our company commander represented stability and direction in a world of violence, death, and destruction. Now his life had been snuffed out. It was the worst grief I endured during the war. The intervening years had not lessened it any. The fighting around the ridges was as deadly as ever. The Japanese had become more vicious, firing for absolute maximum casualties. They knew they were close to losing the island completely. Every step we took forward, they became more violent and more defiant. Even in death, the enemy combatants proved problematic. Fallen Japanese soldiers were left to lay where they fell amongst the rocks and slopes. In the immense heat of the Pacific sun, they decayed, a grotesque and macabre display of nature taking its course. We rarely left our marine dead exposed. It was the least we could do. It wasn't only the smell of bodies that we had to endure, but the smell of rotting rations and human waste. The coral rock surfaces of the ridges made it impossible to bury any waste. Every breath one inhaled was hot, humid air, heavy with countless repulsive odors. October 13th, 1944. The ridges were almost ours. The Japanese forces would never surrender, and we knew this. They would rather die in battle than face the humiliation of defeat. We were ordered to renew the offensive. All efforts seemed futile. We were barely making it. Rumors flew around the battalion that the Army would soon be relieving us. On the 15th of October, Army troops began filling into our area. I could barely believe it. It was almost over. On the morning of October 30th, we squared away our packs and moved out to board ship. We were leaving bloody Peleliu at long last. It almost felt too good to be true. I distinctly remember standing aboard the deck, breathing in deep gulps of clean sea air. Air that wasn't heavy with the fetid stench of death was a luxury. I had survived the meat grinder, a month of relentless combat, being pushed to the limits of human endurance. I spoke to Haney, the oldest member of our battalion and a veteran of the Western Front during World War I. I was curious what a veteran of his caliber would think about the first battle in which I had participated. Boy, that was terrible. I had never seen nothing like that. I'm ready to go back to the States. I've had enough after that. His simple words were enough to convince me about the severity of the fight we had just been through. None of us would ever be the same after what we had endured. To some degree, that is true of all human experience. But something in me died at Peleliu. Perhaps it was a childish innocence that accepted as faith the claim that man is basically good. Of course, I learned many things on Peleliu, things that would prepare me for the rest of the war. I'm convinced that our discipline, esprit de corps, and tough training were the ingredients that equipped me to survive the ordeal physically and mentally. Without all that, God only knows what would have happened to me. The Battle of Peleliu was over, but the war was far from it.